Okay. So like I said, I'm going to start with the erythrocyte disorders. Is it page 6? Does anyone have it in front of you? Okay, thank you. So it's basically the entirety of page 6 in your blood outline. So just really quickly, before we get into the erythrocyte disorders, you should know what erythrocytes are. I do explain all about erythrocytes in the recorded lecture, but just quickly, in case you haven't listened to that yet, erythrocytes are the red blood cells, and their main function is to carry oxygen. They consist of tons of hemoglobin. And if you remember back to cardiovascular system and respiratory system, we talked about hemoglobin being a molecule that carries oxygen. So because red blood cells contain so much hemoglobin, they are able to carry lots of oxygen. And that's really their main function. So the first disorder, anemia, is the main one we'll be talking about. And anemia is basically when blood's oxygen carrying capacity is reduced. So blood is unable to carry oxygen as well, as efficiently as normal. And there's really 3 major reasons why that could happen. And these are listed in your outline at the top. Blood loss. So if you just have a large hemorrhage and you're losing red blood cells, you're also losing the hemoglobin and the oxygen that's within the red blood cells. Also, if you just don't have enough red blood cells. So it's not that you're losing blood, but for some reason, red blood cells in your body either are, maybe you're not producing enough red blood cells. So you just don't have the oxygen carrying capacity that you should, or red blood cells are being destroyed, and maybe they're being destroyed at a faster rate than your body can replace them. So for that reason, you're unable to carry as much oxygen because of a lack of or decreased amount of red blood cells. So the type of anemia that's due to blood loss is called hemorrhagic anemia. And this is just when there's excessive loss of red blood cells due to bleeding. So there's an excessive loss of red blood cells due to bleeding. Hemorrhagic refers to a hemorrhage, which is massive bleeding. You're bleeding out. And this can be acute or chronic. If it's acute, that means it's rapid blood loss, like what would happen with a wound, like a gunshot wound, a stab wound. So acute is very quick and rapid and fast. Chronic is very slight but persistent blood loss. So it's not a sudden wound. It might be because of a bleeding ulcer in your stomach, for instance. So it's not a lot of blood that's coming out, but it is constant. So over time, you will notice a difference. The acute type is very quick. I mean, you would notice it within minutes. The chronic type, it might take weeks to notice anything. All right. Another type is if you have anemia due to decreased red blood cell production or decreased hemoglobin production, because that is specifically within red blood cells what carries oxygen. So there's iron deficiency anemia. This is when there's a reduced availability of iron in the blood. Which leads to insufficient hemoglobin production. Iron is one of the main components of hemoglobin. So if there's not enough iron in your body, then you may not have enough iron to make sufficient hemoglobin. And it is specifically, the iron is specifically what oxygen actually binds to in hemoglobin. So you have to have iron to be able to make enough hemoglobin. Another type is pernicious anemia, which is due to a lack of intrinsic factor. All right, so just to refresh your memory, intrinsic factor was something that was discussed with the digestive system. Intrinsic factor is a substance that is secreted by the stomach that allows for the absorption of vitamin B12. And that is needed to make red blood cells. So with this type of anemia, the body is not producing intrinsic factor. Without intrinsic factor, you're unable to absorb vitamin B12, and therefore that greatly inhibits your body's ability to make red blood cells. All right, another type, the next one down is aplastic anemia. This is when there is destruction or damage to red bone marrow. And that inhibits the production of red blood cells. Okay, one thing that is discussed in the beginning of the outline is that red bone marrow is the site where blood cells are produced. So if red bone marrow is damaged or destroyed, then you're losing the area that is responsible for producing red blood cells. So you're unable to produce as many red blood cells as you normally would. And then finally, there's renal anemia. This is due to a lack of erythropoietin. Erythropoietin, so it's discussed a little bit earlier in the outline. It is in my my recorded lecture, but basically erythropoietin is a hormone produced by the kidneys that stimulates red blood cell production. So you will learn all about that if you listen to that recorded lecture, or if you did already, then you know. It is constantly being produced by the kidneys to stimulate red blood cell production. Okay, so if erythropoietin isn't being produced, then that inhibits the production of red blood cells. Okay, so you can see there's a bunch of different types of anemia that could lead to decreased or a lack of production of red blood cells or of hemoglobin. There is one more type of anemia, and that is an anemia that's caused by like increased destruction of red blood cells. And this type is called hemolytic anemia. This is when there's excessive loss of red blood cells due to hemolysis. Okay, and this was in one of the labs that you guys did last week. We talk about it in lab this week. Hemolysis is the rupture, the destruction of blood cells. Okay. So that is hemolytic anemia. There are there's two subtypes of that I have in your outline. Thalassemias it's like a group of disorders where, do you guys remember in hemoglobin is made of iron, which are the heme, that's the heme part, but also globin, which is a big protein chain. That's the other component of hemoglobin. So with the thalassemias, with this type of disorder, it's when one of the globin chains, which is a protein, is either absent or abnormal. So one of the globin chains is absent or it's abnormal. And what's significant about that is that it makes the erythrocytes very fragile. So they are easily destroyed. They're so fragile that they're very easily damaged and destroyed. So with that particular, group of disorders, with the thalassemias, that's the reason why you have increased red blood cell destruction, because the hemoglobin within the red blood cells is abnormal and it makes the whole cell just very, very fragile. The other type you may have heard of, it's because not that uncommon, sickle cell anemia. This is, again, it's very similar. It's again where you have just an abnormal globin. You have an abnormal protein in hemoglobin. And once again, it makes red blood cells very fragile. In this case, it's called sickle cell anemia because the red blood cells have a sickle shape. They have sort of like a C shape rather than being perfectly round, which normally they're like a disc shape. Instead, they're like a C shape. And they, just like with thalassemias, they're just extra fragile. And so they're very easily damaged, very easily destroyed. And that's why with sickle cell anemia, red blood cell destruction is higher than normal. So that affects the oxygen, the amount of oxygen that's able to be carried in blood. All right, so those are all the different types of anemias. That is basically from a lack of red blood cells or a lack of hemoglobin or a reduced amount of either one of those. There is kind of an opposite situation, and that's called polycythemia. That's the last disorder listed. This is when there's an abnormal increase in the amount of erythrocytes. So an abnormal increase rather than a decrease or a lack of, there's an abnormal increase in the amount of erythrocytes. And you might be thinking, well, why is that bad? Then you can have all the oxygen in the blood that you want because you have plenty of red blood cells. Well, it can actually be pretty dangerous because red blood cells are the most abundant type of blood cell in your blood. And if you have an overproduction of red blood cells, they can actually clog up your blood. They can make blood too thick. They make it too viscous, is another word for thickness. And so blood becomes too thick. It almost gets like sludgy. It's not totally like liquidy anymore. So it doesn't flow as freely through blood vessels. So that becomes an issue. It could even like clog up your blood vessels because you have too many red blood cells. Okay, so I think that is literally the only section of the blood outline that is not covered in the recorded lectures and in the lecture that I give you during lab this week and next week. So you guys can set aside the blood outline. We're all done with that. And I am going to go through a lot of the immune system outline. starting with just the very beginning, the very first page. So now I have the PowerPoint that we can use along with it. Okay. So this whole discussion is going to cover immune system and just the various like defense mechanisms that our bodies have to protect us from diseases and toxins, viruses, bacteria, all that kind of thing. And there are really two major defense systems that are present to protect us. We have first the innate defenses. These are shown at the top, and we'll talk about these first. And then the adaptive defenses, which are down at the bottom. All right, so first of all, I'll just give you some basic descriptions about the innate and then the adaptive defenses. The innate, and they're also referred to sometimes as the non-specific defense system. So a couple things about these, they are present at birth. So these are things that you're born with. They respond immediately. Also, they last throughout the lifetime. So you're born with them and you have them throughout your entire lifetime. And then finally, they are generalized. And they provide an untargeted response. What that means is when I say that they're generalized, they have a generalized and an untargeted response, is that they will respond or protect you against absolutely any foreign material, any foreign thing that tries to get in your body or that has succeeded in getting inside of your body. These lines of defenses will respond just automatically to anything. So they don't have a targeted response. They're not specific to like one specific type of foreign invader. They will respond and defend against anything, absolutely anything. And that's actually different. I'm saying that because it's different from the other defense system, which we'll talk about right now. So the other type is called the adaptive, also known as the specific defense system. A couple things about this one, it develops with exposure to foreign materials. So this is not something that you're born with. It develops as your body is exposed to foreign materials. The response takes longer. Okay, also it provides immunological memory. Basically, it provides memory for your immune system, is what that means. So I'll just explain that a little bit more, that and the first thing. So these defenses are developed when you're exposed to a foreign invader. So if you're exposed to a particular virus, you develop these defenses. And then after that, they remain in your body. So the fact that they remain in your body and can then recognize that exact same virus years later, that's what I mean by providing immunological memory. they can essentially remember the same virus, or if it was a bacterium that they encountered before, they'll remember it and be able to effectively, hopefully effectively, attack it and defend your body against it. Okay, and then the last thing is that this defense system identifies and targets specific foreign invaders. Okay, so this is different from the innate or non-specific defense system, because this is very specific for one specific type of foreign invader. Once you're exposed to a certain virus, you create antibodies, you create cells that are able to defend against just that particular virus at a later time. If you encounter a different virus, those cells will do nothing because they are not specific. They were not made for that specific type of virus. They only recognize the one type. So these defenses are very specific for one specific type of thing. So actually, with the more exposure you get to different viruses and different foreign invaders, it doesn't have to be a virus, but that's just an easy example. The more, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, like with greater exposure, the more you're actually building up your body's immune system, because with that exposure, you're creating these cells that are they then stay in your body forever to be able to defend your body at a later time from those foreign invaders.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is vaccination considered like specific defense system?
Yeah, it is. And that's a great question. And we may or may not get to that. It's at the very end of the outline. But basically, yeah, what you're doing when you're getting vaccinated is you are injecting the person with like a killed form of the virus. Usually that's how vaccinations work. So you're actually exposing your body to that foreign invader. But it is like attenuated, it's like killed, so it can't cause disease. But because you're injecting it into the body, you are getting that exposure. So it triggers your body's immune system to produce the immune cells that will then defend against that particular thing. So yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Good question.
Okay.
Sorry. Good question?
Just with the inflammation, how does the body's line of defense work with the inflammation?
I'm about to get there because it's a good question, but I'm about to get into all the specific types of innate defenses and then the adaptive defenses. And what you're seeing here are some of the non-specific defenses like inflammation, fever, mechanical barriers. I'm going to get to all that right now.
Okay.
All right. First, if you're looking at your outline, there's some terminology. It's all defined already in there for you. So I'm not going to like just read through all of that. But I'm going to just skip right to the more information about the innate defenses. So remember, these are the ones that are non-specific. These are the ones that you're born with. They last throughout your lifetime. So we have a couple lines of defenses. We have, if you look at this diagram right here, a first line of defense. But then if that is penetrated, if that foreign invader gets through the first line of defense, then within your body, there's a second line of defense. So let me go through the first line of defense first. A lot of these things are mechanical barriers, and the mechanical barriers just physically prevent foreign substances from entering the body. Okay, so these are like physical barriers, skin. So there's skin is many layers, multiple layers of tightly packed epithelial cells. So that provides just a physical barrier, just blocking things from getting in. There are mucous membranes like in your nose, in your mouth. There are hairs, nasal hairs, there are cilia. Further inside the respiratory tract that are physical barriers that hopefully like they can catch, they can trap a foreign material as it's entering, and also mechanical flushing through urination, vomiting, defecation, salivation, and tear production. So all of those things could like basically wash foreign material out of those particular body parts or areas of the body where they might be. So tear, just think about like if you get something in your eye, your eyes tear to try to get that substance out. And usually it works after like a minute or two. So you have just the mechanical flushing through like some body fluids that can help hopefully wash the foreign material away. There are also chemical barriers on the body's surface. These consist of certain chemicals that either destroy or prevent the growth of bacteria and viruses. So a couple examples of these chemical barriers. There are acids that are actually secreted onto your skin and in your stomach. There's stomach acid that can kill substances that maybe were ingested accidentally. There's digestive enzymes that are also in the digestive tract, again, that can destroy foreign material if it was ingested. And then lysozyme. Lysozyme is actually like an antibacterial enzyme. And it's found in tears, it's found in saliva, and also in blood. Okay, so that's the first line of defense. These are things that are like closer to the body's surface that would, initially prevent foreign materials from getting in. But if they do get into the body, there is a second line of defense. These are things that are like deeper inside of the body that could then destroy, hopefully, the foreign invader. So these internal defenses are, let me switch my slide. These are mainly cells and chemicals. And the first group that I will talk about are the first one on the list, which are called anti-microbial proteins. These are a group of proteins that can stop microbial growth in body fluids, like blood or interstitial fluid. So they can inhibit or stop microbial growth in body fluids. Okay, so these antimicrobial proteins are interferons and complements. There's two kinds, and they each do something slightly different. The interferon is a protein produced by a cell that's been infected with a virus. So it's produced by a cell that's been infected with a virus. So basically its function is to travel to surrounding cells to prevent viral replication in them. All right, so this, you don't have to, understand all the details of this diagram, but basically it's showing you, here's the initial cell. It was infected with a virus. The virus is right here. But as soon as it's been infected with the virus, it produces interferon, and that interferon diffuses to a neighboring cell to protect it. So then when the virus travels over to that neighboring cell, it is protected. It does not get infected with the virus. So interferon basically prevents viral replication in other cells. So it only protects against viruses though, nothing else. The other type of antimicrobial proteins are the complements. These are a group of inactive plasma proteins. Okay, so they are inactive plasma proteins that normally circulate in blood. Okay, so these are present in your blood always, no matter what, but normally they are inactive. So they're not actually doing anything. But the way that they get activated, it usually happens once you have a foreign invader, like in this instance, I'm calling it a microorganism. So there's some invading microorganism, a really small thing. And typically antibodies that are already within your body, they bind to that invading microorganism. That is what activates the complements. So now the complement will bind to the antibody and the microorganism because they're already connected. And that is called complement fixation. So complement fixation is when the complement binds to, and that's right here, the complement binds to the antibody, which is attached to the microorganism. So you're thinking probably, what does it simply attaching itself to the antibody have to do with anything? When the complement binds to the antibody, it actually helps to enhance inflammation, which is one of your body's defense systems that we're going to talk about next. And it also can trigger lysis. Remember, lysis is like rupturing, destroying. So it can trigger lysis of this microorganism. So you're getting rid of it. It doesn't belong in the body. It can help destroy it. Okay, so that is what complement fixation does. That's when the complements bind to an antibody, which is already attached to a foreign microorganism, and it can enhance inflammation, and it can cause the destruction of that foreign invader. Okay, so now, Joanne, we're getting to inflammation, and hopefully we'll answer your question, but if I don't, just let me know and I can try to answer it. So inflammation is one of the natural defense systems of the body. It is a natural response to any kind of tissue damage Doesn't matter what the damage is. It could be a burn. It could be from a chemical. It could be from like a cut wound, a stab wound, an infection. It is just a general response to pretty much any kind of damage to tissue. And the benefits of inflammation are several. First of all, it prevents the spread of damage to nearby tissues. It helps to destroy cell debris from like dead cells. It helps destroy that and also destroy pathogens. And it helps prepare the tissue for repair. So the 4 characteristic signs and symptoms of inflammation are, first of all, redness. And I'm just going to explain for each one why you see these. So the redness is due to vasodilation. Remember that vasodilation is when blood vessels expand and they get bigger. So what happens if the blood vessels get bigger? What does that do to the blood flow through that vessel?
Constricts it.
If it's dilating,
Increases.
yeah. If it's dilating, it's getting bigger. So that actually allows more room for blood flow. So it increases blood flow. So vasodilation increases blood flow to the area. And the term for that is hyperemia. That's in your outline. That's increased blood flow to the area. Heat. So the heat is due to that increased blood flow. The actual temperature of blood is slightly warmer than your normal body temperature. So wherever you send blood, that area is going to warm up a little bit. And when you have blood going more to the surface of the body, if you have an injury like on the surface of your skin, it can feel a little warmer because of that increased blood flow. Okay, next thing is swelling, and this is due to fluid accumulation. That is due to fluid accumulation. Because when you send more blood to an area, fluid actually leaks out of the blood and goes into the tissue. So fluid leaks out of blood and moves into the tissue. Okay, and then finally pain. And the pain is due to swelling, because swelling puts pressure when you have that like increased fluid. It puts pressure on surrounding tissues, and that's what can cause pain. All right, so for the stages of inflammation, first of all, it's initiated by the release of inflammatory chemicals. The main one that you should recognize, and I believe it's asked on the test, is histamine. That is the big one. So definitely know that histamine is a major inflammatory chemical. The other two do it as well, but histamine is the main one that you'll hear about, and that I believe that I ask about it on the test. So you have that histamine as well as those other two chemicals being released. It causes vasodilation, blood vessels expand. That allows increased blood flow to the area. And that also allows for phagocytes within the blood to be, more of them will be sent to this area of damage. So next to phagocyte mobilization, that just means that there will be an increased number of phagocytes that reach the injured area. You'll have an increased number of phagocytes. Do you guys remember what phagocytes are? I feel like I remember talking about them at a certain point in some lecture. Anyone know? If you don't, I'll tell you.
Is it a white blood cell?
They can, so yeah, certain white blood cells act as phagocytes. So yeah, that's right. And then what they do is they tend to be large cells, and they basically surround and destroy foreign material. So they will destroy, their job is really to destroy foreign invaders, and they're not specific. So they will destroy like anything foreign that they don't recognize that doesn't belong in the body. Okay. So there are, in the next sentence in your outline, it uses two of the terms that were described in the blood outline that I described in my recorded lecture. So you do have these definitions provided for you in the previous outline, but I will explain what they mean really quickly right now, just so you can understand what this statement is even saying. So the term diapedesis means, basically diapedesis is the ability that white blood cells have to leave the blood. They can actually leave circulation and then move out into a tissue that's been damaged. If you look at the PowerPoint that I have up right now, and you look at this middle picture, the cells that are shown in yellow represent white blood cells. And in particular, they represent white blood cells that can act as phagocytes. And so the pink thing, the tube looking thing, is a blood vessel. So you can see these white blood cells like squeezing through the wall of that blood vessel to get out to that injured tissue. So the term diapedesis refers to the ability that white blood cells have to squeeze out of blood vessels and go out like into a tissue. The other term that's used here that's in bold is chemotaxis. And that term refers to the fact that these white blood cells are chemically attracted to an area of damage or like a tissue injury. So it's not like white blood cells have eyes that they can just look around and see where there's an injury. They have to, be able to detect it in a different way. And when a tissue is damaged, it releases certain chemicals. Those chemicals are detected by these white blood cells, and they're drawn to that area as a result. All right. So now that you understand what those two terms mean, you can kind of understand hopefully what that statement in your outline means. So it says through diapedesis, so that's, leaving a blood vessel. Neutrophils, those are a particular type of white blood cell, and it is a type of white blood cell that acts as phagocytes. So neutrophils squeeze through the wall of a blood vessel, and they rely on chemotaxis, that's the chemical attraction, to reach an injury. So neutrophils and monocytes are the two types of white blood cells that can act as phagocytes, and they're both listed right here. So the neutrophils go out right away. They perform phagocytosis, which is basically eating and destroying this, whatever it is, the foreign invader, the pathogen. Monocytes are the other ones that can do that too. It takes them a little bit longer. Neutrophils are always able to get there first. But monocytes do get there, and they actually typically arrive in greater numbers. There's usually more monocytes that can arrive at an injury. Okay, so that's basically that second part. Phagocytes, we just spent a little while talking about what phagocytes are. They are specialized cells that perform phagocytosis. And phagocytosis is basically when these cells ingest and destroy foreign material. And the two types of phagocytic cells, the two types of cells that can act as phagocytes, are the neutrophils and the monocytes. Okay, and there are 5 stages of chemotaxis. They're pretty easy. The first one I described a little bit already. You have to have chemotaxis. That's when the phagocytes are chemically attracted to an injured tissue. Okay, next is adherence, which is the attachment of the phagocyte to the microbe. Okay, so what you're looking at on the PowerPoint, this big structure is the actual phagocyte. This small little thing right here is the microbe. So phagocytes typically are pretty large. These are large white blood cells. So the phagocyte is chemically attracted to the microbe. The second thing is that they attach. Here's the microbe and here's the phagocyte. Next is ingestion. So this is when the plasma membrane of the phagocyte surrounds the microbe. Okay, if you look carefully at the picture, you can see, do you see the plasma membrane kind of extending like these little projections that go along either side of the microbe? And eventually they're going to totally surround it. And then here's what happens. It pinches off a little bit of the membrane and it brings the entire microbe inside. So that's what you're seeing right here. This is the microbe now inside of the phagocyte. Then you have digestion. There are actual digestive enzymes within the phagocyte that break down the microbe. Okay, so now the microbe, which was in one piece, is broken apart into little pieces, and that results in killing. So these chemicals quickly kill most microbes. All right, so that's it for the phagocytes. And just to remind you guys, we are still in the innate, the non-specific defenses. So all of these things, inflammation, phagocytes, now the natural killer cells, these will attack, excuse me, any foreign invader, any microbe. They are not specific. And these are things that you're born with. You're born with those phagocytes. You're born with these cells. So these next types of cells are called natural killer cells. I really like their name, and it kind of describes what they do. First of all, they're a group of lymphocytes, which is these are a type of white blood cell that are found in body fluids. They're in blood, they're in lymph, and their function is kind of what their name tells you. They attack and they kill foreign cells so they're not attacking viruses or microbes. They attack actual cells, which are bigger. So they attack any kind of cell that they identify as foreign. So this could be a cell that's been infected with a virus. Or what's also interesting, this could be a cell that is cancerous and it's not recognized as being a normal cell anymore. Okay, and basically what they do is they cause lysis. They cause cytolysis, which means, remember, lysis is rupture or bursting, destroying, and then cyto means cell. So they cause the cell, that foreign cell, to rupture and be destroyed. So we have one more thing that's part of the innate, the general defenses, and then we'll get into the specific defenses. So this last thing is just a fever. And a fever is when you have an abnormally high body temperature. And that often happens if you've been invaded by microorganisms. Not always, but sometimes. And although fevers make you feel uncomfortable, they don't feel good, but they are actually doing a couple things that help your body fight off the foreign invader and to heal. So basically a fever is just a generalized response. It occurs throughout the body. It doesn't happen in one localized area. So like with inflammation, if you have an infection or you have a tissue damage, inflammation happens just in that one specific area. The fever affects your entire body. So anyway, whenever white blood cells or phagocytes are exposed to microbes, microorganisms, they release chemicals called pyrogens. And these are chemicals that raise body temperature. They increase body temperature.
I have a question about the cytocells. Is there a way that they can like destroy cells, like nutrients that are needed?
So this is a question about what? The cytosomes?
What you just said destroys the cells?
Do you mean the natural killer cells?
Yes, that.
Yeah.
Is there a way that they can malfunction and then kill stuff that we actually need?
They recognize there's proteins on cells' surfaces that are either recognized as self or non-self. And so typically there are issues with the immune system, like an autoimmune disease, where your body can attack its own cells, but normally that's not due to the natural killer cells. I mean, I suppose anything can malfunction in the body, but you don't generally hear about them doing that. Usually it's other white blood cells that fail to recognize your cells as being self, and they accidentally attack your own cells. So it's typically not these, but it probably could be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the pyrogens are chemicals that raise body temperature, and although that makes you feel uncomfortable, you have a fever, it doesn't feel good, it is doing a couple things to help. And first thing that it does is it inhibits the growth of bacteria. Bacteria actually grow pretty well at our body temperature. Like that's an ideal temperature for them, but anything much higher is not, and it would actually inhibit their growth. So by increasing your body temperature, even by just a couple of degrees, it can inhibit bacteria from spreading in the body. So it can prevent the spread of an infection. And then also, a fever, having an increased temperature, can speed up the body's reactions that aid in repair. So it helps to speed up your body's reactions that are repairing tissues and healing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
There is any difference how the body reacts? Is there any differences between bacteria and the viruses, or that or the body know them the same?
Yeah, there is a difference. And we will get to that in just a second. Because generally, so your your innate defenses, the ones that we are just talking about, will, for the most part, they defend against anything equally. So they would respond to bacteria or viruses the same. But you're absolutely right with adaptive immunity. You have specific cells that would respond to like bacteria, and then other ones that would respond to viruses. So we'll get to that in a second. We're about to get into adaptive immunity right now.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to ask you guys, so we can either take a break because we've been talking for like an hour, but I don't have a ton left. What I have left is the adaptive immunity. So that's like it's like 2 pages, because I am going to stop once I get to the antibodies, because I have a recorded lecture that talks about those 2 pages, going over like the antibodies in the body, the 5 different classes of antibodies. So what do you want to do? Would you guys rather just keep going and finish those last 2 pages, or do you want to take a quick break? I don't really care.
I think we can keep going.
Yeah, keep going. Okay. Fine with me. Okay. So we are just continuing down. Right below the fever section is the section for adaptive or specific immunity. So we talked about some of the general characteristics of this type of immunity already. I'll give you a couple more details. The term specificity, which we kind of talked about already, this means that it recognizes and is designed to attack specific foreign invaders. Also, it is systemic. That means the response is widespread and is not restricted to the initial infection site. So it's a widespread response throughout the body. And the last characteristic is another one we've talked about already. It has memory. So that means after an initial exposure, it will recognize and protect against the previously encountered pathogen. Okay. So remember that adaptive immunity develops as a result of exposure to foreign invaders. And specifically, it's because of exposure to antigens. And you guys have a definition for antigens in your outline right below that. Antigens are non-self molecules that are produced by, basically, they're produced by cells, usually large cells. And antigens are presented on the surface of these cells as a way for other cells to be able to recognize them as, you know, being foreign or being dangerous. So antigens trigger an immune response from our immune system. Basically, our immune cells will recognize one of two things. They'll recognize something as being self, and in that case, it is left alone. If it's recognized as self, your body thinks that it is part of your body, which it should be, and it will not be attacked. If something is seen as being non-self, it is treated as a foreign invader, and there will be a reaction against it. So there's basically two choices, self or non-self. Okay, so a couple of things about lymphocytes. So first of all, you have white blood cells. They are called leukocytes. And one of the major types of leukocytes are the lymphocytes. And we did talk a little bit about lymphocytes in our very first unit when we talked about the lymphatic system. And we talked about these lymphocytes because they hang out in the lymphoid tissues. They hang out in your spleen, they hang out in lymph nodes, in your tonsils, things like that. So here's a little bit more information. Adaptive immunity involves these lymphocytes. So the lymphocytes are B cells and T cells. B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. There's two kinds of lymphocytes. They both, for the origin, they both originate in red bone marrow. The B and the T cells both originate in red bone marrow. So that's where they are made. That's what that means. They're made in red bone marrow. Once they're made, they may travel somewhere else to mature. So that's the next thing, maturation. T cells, let me go to the next slide. Here we go. T cells go to the thymus, and that's where they mature. B cells, they remain in the red bone marrow. So they stay there and they continue to develop there. From there, they will then move into the lymphoid organs that we learned about in Unit 1. So once mature, B and T cells will move into secondary lymphoid organs. So that would be places like the lymph nodes, the spleen, the tonsils. In addition to that, though, so they do move into those lymphoid tissues, but they also, lymphocyte, and this is the second thing, lymphocytes will also circulate through the body. They move into the bloodstream and they continuously circulate through the body. So they're basically, traveling everywhere. They're in the blood, they're traveling throughout the whole body, and they are located in these specific lymphoid tissues. So they're there, they're ready in case any foreign invader does penetrate the body. So, but until this point, they're not really doing anything. Like they're just there. But they can get activated if they do encounter something. So that is the next step, activation. Lymphocytes will become activated when their receptors bind to an antigen. And remember, an antigen is something that is non-self. So they have receptors on their surface that will bind to an antigen. Okay, so that antigen would be on a foreign cell, on something foreign that doesn't belong. As soon as the lymphocyte or lymphocytes bind to that foreign thing, now you have this last step, proliferation. So that means you make a ton of them, and differentiation. So these activated lymphocytes begin to multiply rapidly. They begin to multiply rapidly, and they differentiate, which means that they basically they'll turn into one of two things. They will differentiate into either memory cells or effector cells. All right. So that is what happens with B cells and T cells. But from there, it's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to talk about the difference between the T cells and the B cells and what they respond to and how they respond. So there are two types of adaptive immunity based on what the foreign invader is. There is what's called cellular immunity, and there's humoral immunity. So we're going to talk about cellular immunity first, and this is the type that involves the T cells. So you have cellular immunity. It involves only the T cells, the T lymphocytes. It is effective against any intracellular pathogen. Intracellular means that the pathogen is within a cell. So most commonly what that would be is a virus-infected cell or a cancer cell. Okay, so this is effective against a pathogen that is inside of a cell, not outside, because that's the other type. Okay, so once the T cells bind to the foreign antigen, remember I said that when they bind, their receptor binds to a foreign antigen, that's when they get activated. So once it binds, it becomes activated. And we already said too, once these B cells and T cells get activated, they multiply like crazy, they make a ton. and they differentiate. So in this case, they multiply and they differentiate into 3 different types of effector cells, or they become memory cells. So the first 3 choices that are listed are the effector cells that are actually like doing something. And then the 4th option is just the memory cells. So first of all, you have helper T cells. These increase the intensity of the immune response. The cytotoxic T cells, they directly attack and kill the foreign cells. Okay. The regulatory T cells, these reduce the intensity of the immune response. So they basically do the opposite of the helper T cells. And then finally, the memory T cells, these are really important. These exist in the body for years. And they provide that immunological memory that we talked about in the beginning. So they provide memory, which basically means they remember the particular foreign antigen that they were made to fight against initially. So if that same foreign antigen is ever seen again, they are already there, ready and waiting to launch an attack against it. So they will be able to remember that same foreign antigen at a later time. That's what we mean by saying immunological memory. Okay, and it's important that these cells are produced at the same time as the effector cells. The effector cells are the ones that are actually responding and ultimately killing the foreign invader. But without the memory cells, you wouldn't recognize that foreign invader at a later time, and you wouldn't be able to defend against it. You would have to launch this whole response all over again. But basically, if you have these memory cells present in your body already, you can encounter that foreign antigen again, and they will respond so quickly that you won't even get sick from it. If you didn't have these memory cells, you would go through the whole thing again. You would be invaded, you would get sick, you would have to make these cells all over again. So it's really helpful that you have these that remain in your body. Okay, so that's the cellular immunity. The main thing with cellular immunity is that it involves the T cells, and those T cells will attack an intracellular pathogen, something that has invaded a cell and it's inside of a cell. So that's different from the other type, which is humoral immunity. This involves the B lymphocytes or the B cells. And this is also different because it's effective against not intracellular pathogens, but extracellular pathogens. Extracellular means that they are found outside of cells rather than within cells. So this would be things like bacteria, fungi, parasites. Okay, So for the two different types of immunity, cellular and humoral, the main difference is the cell that's involved, either T cells or B cells, and the type of pathogen that it's responding to. Okay. So once the B cells are activated, they, just like the T cells, they multiply and they differentiate into memory cells and effector cells. In this case, there's only one type of effector cell, and they're called plasma cells. And what the plasma cells do is that they secrete antibodies. Plasma cells secrete antibodies.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So with an autoimmune disorder, do people not have a memory cell that helps them remember because their body keeps on getting sick?
It's not that. It's actually that your immune system, and there's several different ways that it can, where this failure can occur, but basically your immune system fails to recognize your self antigens. So it doesn't have anything to do with the memory cells. It has to do with the antigen on your cell's surface and the receptors that are on your lymphocytes. And autoimmune diseases are actually a type of disease that are not very well understood. We know a lot about them, but there's a lot that we don't know about them. And because and especially what we don't know is what causes this to happen. So we do know that it's a failure to recognize your own cells as being self, but we don't know why sudden, because usually it's like a sudden change, like it's been fine for a while, and then suddenly your body just fails to recognize them as being self. That's not always the case. Sometimes you're born with that, they never are recognized as being self cells, but sometimes it's just like a switch that turns and suddenly like your body just starts attacking these cells. And so it's not very well understood. So certainly if like all these super smart scientists can't explain it, I definitely can't explain it. But what we definitely know is just the failure to recognize the self antigen. It's kind of scary actually, because it could happen. I mean, it can happen like at any time. I mean, chances are it won't, but you never know. So yeah, that hopefully that answers your question.
Yes.
So yeah, back to just the plasma cells we talked about, they produce antibodies, and then the memory B cells, you can put exactly the same thing that you put for the memory T cells. These exist in the body for years, and they provide immunological memory. Okay. So I definitely do have a recorded lecture in the immune part of Unit 2 that covers antibodies, and it covers the 5 main classes of antibodies and immunity, ways to become immune. The one thing I'm not sure that's in there, and it'll take just a minute for me to do, so I'll do it with you right now, is the very, very last part of your outline, which is the homeostatic imbalances that are related to immunity. So it's on the last page of your outline, just like 2 little tiny sections. And this is where we'll talk about a couple of examples of autoimmune diseases. The first one, though, is an immunodeficiency, which is it can be genetic or an acquired condition, and it causes immune cells or other cells that are part of the innate defenses, like phagocytes, complements, natural killer cells, to behave abnormally. Okay, and just a couple examples of acquired immune deficiencies. Hodgkin's lymphoma is cancer of the B cells. Another example is AIDS, which is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And this impairs the functions of the helper T cells. Okay, and then this one, which you guys have had a couple questions about, another group of immune diseases are the autoimmune diseases. So you have a description here already that these occur when the immune system fails to distinguish self from non-self. So as a result, it begins attacking its own tissues. It produces antibodies or the cytotoxic T cells, which are the ones that directly attack and kill cells against its own tissues. And I only listed 3, but there's tons of these out there. There's some that are very rare that you don't hear about a lot, but there's a lot of different autoimmune diseases. I chose the ones that are very common that you just hear about more. The first one is multiple sclerosis. This is where the body attacks the myelin. Myelin is do you guys remember? It's like the white covering around neurons. So the body destroys the myelin covering on neurons, specifically in the central nervous system. And usually we talk about MS when we in A&P1 when we cover the neuron and we talk about the nervous system. So you may have learned about it then, but it tends to affect, it can affect eyesight. It can affect a lot of motor function. Okay, another one is type 1 diabetes, which is when the body destroys the pancreatic cells that produce insulin. And the last example is rheumatoid arthritis, which destroys joints. It attacks the tissues in the joint that form the joint capsule mainly. All right, so for everything I did not cover, you definitely, because I just went in and looked, you guys definitely have a recorded lecture for all of that information. So you pretty much have lectures now, either in person, Zoom, or recorded for all of your outline information. I do just want to make sure that you guys are looking at the test reviews that I post. It's pretty clear when you have now, because I've started to include some extra credit questions on the tests, and I'm giving you the extra credit questions on the test review. I give you a couple more, and then you only have 2 out of, I give you like 4 or 5, and then you'll see 2 of them on the test. But you can prepare them in advance. I'm giving them to you now. So I can see those of you that have been using them and have been preparing them because your answers are perfect. If you haven't been using my test reviews, you should, because that'll help you. I'm giving you those extra credit questions. So feel free to prepare them ahead of time. And that'll give you at least a couple of extra points on the test. So we have just a couple of more things. You guys only have 2 tests left. You have this one, which typically people do pretty well on. It is definitely like the information for unit 6 is easier to understand than unit 4 or 5. You guys just had the 2 hardest units, I would say, probably out of A&P1 and A&P2. Metabolism and the urinary system are both very tricky and very heavy on the physiology. And there's so much, like so many hormones for the urinary system, so many like processes to remember. So some of you did great on that test, which was impressive because that is a hard one. And same thing for metabolism. That one was really tricky. So I feel pretty safe in saying that I think this test you'll find just a little bit more manageable because just the nature of the information is just a little easier. It's not as intense. And then the last unit that you guys have is reproductive system, which is a lot of just anatomy, which is typically easier than the physiology stuff. And then there's a little bit on human development and a little bit on genetics, both of which are fairly interesting. So I think you'll like that unit too. And then at the very end of the semester, our last week, I think we're in week 11 right now. So in week 15 at the end, you have the optional final exam. And anybody can take that. It cannot hurt your grade. It can only help you. And if you take the final exam, it can replace your current lowest test grade. And if you take the final exam and it ends up being your lowest test grade, it just gets dropped. So it can't hurt you to take that. So I just wanted to give you just an idea of what you have coming up. And the unit 6 test will be a week from today. It'll be next Thursday. And then after that, you guys only have one more unit test and maybe the optional final if you're going to take it. If you after unit 7, if you have an A in the class, there's no need to take the final exam because we don't award A-, A+, you just get an A. So taking the final wouldn't really do anything for you. But what I do typically do is I add a grade column in the grade book and I tell you, first of all, whether or not taking the final exam could help your grade. And if so, I can figure out exactly what you need to get on the final exam to bring you up to the next letter grade. So I can't do that yet because I don't have all your regular unit test grades done. I have to calculate that after you've taken the unit 7 exam, but just know that that is something I can do. So you know, first of all, whether or not it would even help you to take the final exam. And then also, so you know, like about what grade you'd have to get on it. All right, so that's pretty much all I have for you guys. Do you have any questions about anything coming up or about the unit's material, anything like that? Okay, well, we're done actually a little bit early today. I cannot believe I have 4 pets, 4 animals living in this house, and not one of them has interrupted class today, which is like a first, I think. So maybe we'll end now while I'm ahead, and that hasn't happened. All right, well, it was great to see you guys. I will see group B for lab on Tuesday. I'll send you a reminder, and everybody else, I'll send an announcement just reminding you about, next week's events soon. All right, so have a good day. I will talk to you soon.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.